Hello, I'm Matt and welcome to Cast Theology, a channel about theology and beer. Today we're looking at a drink that isn't beer, but it's often found in the supermarkets next to it, and in pubs as well. Today then, we're going to be looking at beer's cousin, cider. In this episode, I'll start off with a brief rundown of what cider is and how it's made. Then we'll go into a little bit of its history. After that, we shall head into the kitchen and see some cider in action, so by the end of this episode, you'll be able to recognise a cider. So, before we get started, it's probably worth me clarifying what we're going to be talking about today, and that's the word cider itself. Now, folks in the United States will have heard of the word cider, but for you guys, it's a word for apple juice, whereas what I'm talking about is the alcoholic stuff, which you guys often refer to as hard cider. So, to all my American viewers, you may want to take note of this, because in the UK, we call the alcoholic stuff cider, and we call the non-alcoholic stuff apple juice, because it's, well, apple juice. So why is cider not a beer? Well, it comes down to two things, the ingredients and the way it's made. So, pretty much everything really. Cider's made from apples, which are prepared and fermented in a similar way to wine. The apples are grown, and they're crushed, and the juice is squeezed all out of them. As with beer, yeast is used to help convert the sugar into alcohol, as well as sulfur dioxide, which is added to help reduce spoilage, and nitrogen, which is added to help the yeast grow so it can keep converting all that lovely sugar. This, of course, is a slightly different way of making an alcoholic drink, and it's different to the way beer's made, although fermentation is still a big part of the process. Cider's history is long, and in England at least can be traced roughly back to the time of the Saxons, although it was the Romans before them that spread apples all across Europe. Now that said, there isn't an exact date for when cider came into being. One thing we do know is that variations of cider have sprung up all over the world, but in terms of who drinks it the most, well, the UK takes the top spot. Talking of variations, cider continues its wine parallel in the variations of flavour range. We could often talk about sweet or dry ciders. Cider can also be made with fruit other than apples as well. Cider made with pears, also known as perry, was once very popular, and there are also ciders made with fruits such as cherries or blackberries, although some may argue that it's not a true cider since apples aren't involved. The process of their creation, however, remains mostly the same. So, as always, we've learned a bit about cider and its history, and it's time to head into the kitchen for some live-action hands-on experience with this fruity drink. So, without further ado, let's go see some ciders in action. So, welcome back to the kitchen. Now today we're showing off 4 separate ciders, or 2 if you're feeling picky, because 2 of them are going to be fruit ciders, perries. But I picked them all to give you a good idea of the range and variety of ciders. As always, I've picked them up from a local supermarket so you can try themselves if you're in the UK. If not, then at least I can give you a decent show and tell. As always, if you like this sort of thing, you want to learn about cider, beer or theology, there's always a nice little subscribe button down there that you can press to keep yourself informed, and you can watch future videos, and there's always links in the description if you just want to learn more. So let's have a look at some of the ciders that we've got. I have got Bulmer's Original for us today and Thatcher's Haze, which are 2 pretty good ciders, both from 2 well-known UK cider makers. So while beer doesn't really have a region it's made in, a lot of our ciders come from the south. Well, south for me anyway. So let's crack on and see the differences. So first off, we are going to go for the Bulmer's Original. Quite a popular cider from over here, and it's from the Herefordshire region, which I'll pop a thing up there somewhere to show you the area. Let's pop this open and find out what a cider looks like. Oh, but before, I'm using a nucleated glass because this is fizzy stuff. I'm not going to go for much of a head on this, and there's 2 reasons for that. One is that you don't really get a head on cider, and 2, you don't pour it with a cider. And if you do get one, then it tends to disappear pretty quickly. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of bubbles in this one. Looks a lot like fizzy apple juice, which is where things get dangerous, because it tastes like apples and it looks like apple juice. You know, you can quite easily have a couple of these without noticing. Now, ABVs, as always, ABVs 4.5, which is around about your average and about your average sort of ABV for this sort of thing. Most of the ones on the market sort of float around that sort of 5, 4-ish kind of mark. There you go. So as you can see, it's clear. You can tell it's very appley juicy. It's got the kind of colours of apple juice, carbonated as well, so lots of bubbles. A very fizzy, very easy-going drink. Excellent for summer. Some other guys to look out for. You can see I'm using a Strongbow glass. Strongbow is one of the more popular cider makers in the UK. You can find it everywhere, often in pubs. Others you can find are Stowford Press, which again I'll stick things up here for. And as I mentioned in the last episode about porter and stout, if you're going to mention those two, you've got to mention Guinness. When you mention cider, always worth a mention, again from Ireland, is Magners, which looks like this. Very sweet tasting to my tastes. Very good indeed. Worth a look. So I'm going to pop this bottle back there because we're going to look at the next cider, which is Thatcher's Haze, and I've picked this as a counter to this, and you'll see why in just a moment. Let's just get you open. Ooh, ooh, fizzy, fizzy. There you go, you can see the difference. So, Thatcher's Haze, bit flatter, not as carbonated, still a lot of bubbles in there though. But you can see it lives up to its name, haze. So cider will typically look either like this, it's more traditional sort of style cider. This is your more commercially sort of cider. But essentially, same ingredients, often the same taste. These ones, obviously, just a bit hazier, but doesn't really affect the taste that much. Although sometimes you can sort of pick up the sort of feel that like the skin's still in there, almost. Now, of course, these guys are from Somerset, as it says down there. And again, we're looking at the 4.5 on there. So here we go. There's a range of ciders for you. From two of the opposite ends of the spectrum. In terms of ABV, although it says 4.5, that is an average. They can go much higher. We certainly sell a cider at our place called Old Rosie. Again, I'll stick a thing up here somewhere with a picture of it. And it looks like this. And it's 7.3%. So rocket fuel. If you have a couple of them unaware, it will certainly knock you about. I've had those sort of experiences myself. There was one cider I had which was 7%, and I didn't know it was 7%, and yeah, I stood up to go home and my legs sort of went a bit wobbly and I had to sit down and text my good lady and say I may be a bit late because I've just got to get my bearing. But that's because it's such an easy going drink. So there are two examples of ciders. We've got the Bulmers and the Thatcher's Haze. And next up, we're going to get all fruity, even more fruity, because we're going to look at a perry and a fruity cider. So let's do a nice little crossfadey thing, and we shall go and look at those. So next up, we have a pear cider or perry, and an example of a fruit cider. So we've got a bit continental for this, yes, because over in Europe they love a good cider as well, especially in Sweden. So I've gone for Kopparberg pear for my perry, and for my fruity cider I have gone for this, which I found in the Co-op, also from Sweden, from a place I am not going to try and pronounce because I will absolutely annihilate the pronunciation. Elk Warning, which is a blackberry cider, which I've had before. It's quite nice. In fact, I was actually asked by a family member Yes, that's right, Terry, I'm mentioning you. Whether or not I actually drink all this stuff while I'm filming, and the answer is yes, but I always do this on a day off. Lovely. Right. So, first up we're going to go for Perry, which is going to be obviously a pear cider. Now, there's an organisation in Britain called the Campaign for Real Ale, and they would not class this as a perry because traditionally the perry is made with a pear called a perry pear. Much like you can't call champagne champagne unless it's made in Champagne, they argue that unless it's a perry pear you can't call it a perry and you should call it a pear cider. A lot of cider makers though don't agree with them, but this one is actually labelled as a pear cider rather than a perry, but still it's cider made with pears. So let's have a look and let's see if we've got a difference. Now, using a glass here, Stella Cider. Stella are usually famous for their lagers, but a few years back they also branched out into cider, and it's very, very sweet. It looks a lot in appearance like the Bulmers did. Very sweet cider. So that's a good example of a sweet cider. So let's have a look at this as a perry and see what the difference between this is and a normal cider. So straight away we can see the colour difference. Let's just pop the Strongbow back in. So you can see the colour difference. Again, fizzy, very much like cider, no head. But you can but that obviously comes from an apple. You can definitely tell the apple juicy kind of thing. And pears, well, look at that lovely pear colour. Very, very sort of pale green. Oh, awesome. Really good, this stuff as well. Right. So there you go, an example of a perry, or a pear cider in this case. Again, 4.5% on the old ABVs. But yeah, there isn't much difference, is there? It's made from pears, colour's different, so it's almost exactly like the apple version. Next up, we're going to go for our little can of the Elk Warning, which is a fruity cider made from blackberries. Now, a lot of these have turned up in recent years. It's certainly become more popular, certainly with the younger, more millennial-y crowd over summer. So over summer, we often see in our place a massive uptick in the sales of fruit cider rather than anything else. They'll tend to go off lager, or they'll go off ale if they drink that normally, and they'll go on to more fruity ciders. A couple of ones to mention that are always been firm favourites with mixed fruit cider fans, which again I'll stick a thing up here for. You've got Copperberg. Again, they do a mixed fruit cider. That's always very popular. I find it a bit sickly. It's a very sweet, sickly cider, but really tasty. Other well-selling brands, you've got the offering from New Zealand, which is Old Moot, which I believe I've pronounced correctly, but because no one can pronounce it correctly. Another one as well from Sweden is Rekorderlig. They do a lot of fruity ciders similar to Copperberg. So let's crack this little one open and we shall see what we've got. Glug, glug, glug. Now this of course is a blackberry cider, and as again with the Copperberg and the cider, you can see that it's the colour of the fruits that made it. So blackberries, it's not like I can smell that. So yeah, blackberries, very blackberry coloured, although that's a bit redder than anything. There we go. The Perry we've got there, which is a very pear light green colour, and the very yellowy, juicy, appley cider there. So, as I said, these are often very sweet, your sort of fruit ciders and your pear ciders. Tend to be much more on the sweet side. This one is just 4% on this one. But here we are. Here's your examples of cider. So we have a cider there, we have a fruit cider there, and we have a perry or pear cider there. So yeah, look at that. You made it to the end of the very fruity episode, where we've learned that cider is an alcoholic beverage that's created from apples and fruit, and it's not really a beer at all. But it's worth a mention because it's part of UK beer culture and is popular worldwide, especially in Europe, Sweden, and of course Belgium. There, it's a cracking drink, especially during the summer months. Very, very refreshing. So you can obviously see the little Santa hat in the back there, because this is my December episode. It's the last episode of December. So I wish you all a very happy Christmas, if that's your thing. If not, then I wish you a happy Hanukkah, or whatever you celebrate, or even if you just have a holiday, it's fine. I just wish you a great end of the year. Next year, I'm going to be doing a little channel update on the 5th, and the next beer I'm going to look at is brown ale. So that might be a good time to Google what a Geordie is if you're not from the UK. So until next time, and until next year, grab a drink and keep asking questions. Mmm.